Good evening. Welcome to Transition Talks Tuesdays. My name is Tim Markle. I'm director of the Youth Health Transition Initiative in Wisconsin. The fall 2024 edition of Transition Talks Tuesdays is being done in partnership with the three Autism Society affiliates of Wisconsin, the Greater Autism Society of Greater Wisconsin, South Central Wisconsin, Southeastern Wisconsin, as well as the Children's Resource Center South. Tonight, we're going to be talking about financial planning. We're going to talk about what will happen to your child when you're no longer around to take care of them. What are ABLE accounts? This workshop's designed to help families plan for the financial future of their children or other dependents with special needs. Learn about eligibility for government benefits while helping to meet the needs for lifetime care and quality of life issues. This presentation will cover some estate planning, ABLE accounts, guardianship, wills, trusts, letters of intent. And for this, we welcome in the wonderful Paul Brokenshire from Special Needs Planning, LLC. Thank you so much for being here, Paul.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I thought it was like a fanfare walking in or something.
If I had music, if I had brought my band with me, I would have played a fanfare for you.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. But Tim, it's always a pleasure to speak with on these groups. I know I try to do it a couple times a year. They're always so impactful to the community that we serve. So, little way of introduction. So, my name is Paul Brokenshire. I'm the current president of Special Needs Planning LLC. The business was started by Bob Johnston many years ago, it feels like. But the idea is that on our end, we're financial planners that specifically help families in this community that have special needs individuals in. So that could be anything from obviously quite a lot of involvement with the Autism Society. I work closely in most of the Milwaukee area with the Wounded Warrior Project. So there's a lot of what ifs. So very basic conversation we'll go through today. We try to keep it as high level as possible, but just some general information that people, want to dive into. I will make sure I get the compliance part of it out. I am not an attorney. I am a financial planner. By that, I mean I don't technically give legal advice, but guess what? I've done this long enough that I can kind of figure my way through the laws and the things that we have to abide by. But this will give us a good idea of if you need to go to an attorney, these are the things that we want to make sure. These are the touch points that we want to address in that regard. So, in that regard, I know Tim does a great job of keeping an eye on the chat or anything. So, if I may, I welcome questions, but just want to make sure we're being respectful of people's time and go from there. I also love technology. It works all the time. So if I see a little technical glitch that pops up, forgive me.
Seamlessly. Perfect.
Seamless.
Every single time. No do-overs. It's beautiful.
100%.
There we go. Looking good.
So everybody can see what we're dealing with at this point, right? All right. So this is obviously our logo. The presentation is basically planning for their future as well as ours. So try to keep it as generic as possible. On today's agenda, I want to make sure that we outline those basics of those issues that families in your situation deal with. Kind of go just a high level view of them, basic understanding of government benefits. Obviously, there's a lot of detail there, but let's try to keep it high level, make sure we cover what needs to today. Discuss differences in estate planning. The general public, obviously, we treat things very differently than we do in the special needs community. What's important to you? A lot of you are probably caregivers of people with special needs. So we got to discuss what's important for you. How do we communicate those goals? How do we fund a trust or maybe an entity that we have to use? And really, how do we start that planning process if we haven't started it yet? So I always want to say, if we haven't, it's never too late. Just you got to start somewhere. So let's start with the basics. So when we talk about estate planning, everybody talks about your will. There are standard provisions on our will. These are basically things that the government, these benefits are based on a financial need. The government has restrictions on the amount of assets a beneficiary may have in order to qualify for a larger or any type of inheritance. We want to make sure that these individuals that we're serving, they don't lose sight of their entitlements. They don't lose access to their benefits under Medicaid or the financial support. That in general could be supplemental securities, Social Security's income. It could be SSDI, anything. We want to make sure that we're not jeopardizing that in our own estate planning. So let's begin with that end in mind. Unfortunately, in life in general, we all live in a world where there's a consistent struggle between need and affordability. We think we want to provide the best lifetime of care we can for ourselves and for our families. But these things are expensive. Life comes with a cost. We need to do that. So there's always a struggle between the two of them. So how do we do that? The law says anyone who wants to receive government support cannot have more than $2,000 in their name. And not too many people can live on $2,000 a month, let alone for the rest of life. So what's the answer? We know that we want the access to get health benefits. We know we want to provide access to Social Security income, which provides a small monthly income exclusively for those basic survival needs. And we know we need access to the Medicaid, which will vary by state. So what's the answer? And then we also want to dive into just the idea that these are very different topics. So what I cover with my able-bodied families, the legal concerns and the financial side of things are very different on that side of things. First, let's talk about some of those legal concerns, specifically wills, trusts, and guardianship. Everybody here thinks they know what a will is. But let's break it down. A will is your statement to the court of what you want to happen with your items, with your property, with your stuff when you die. You designate someone called the executor to enforce the intentions of your will. However, a will can be challenged or contested in court. This could be an issue in special needs family because sometimes we have challenges coming out of left field, and sometimes we have individuals that would be contesting it on their own wills, right? So we tend to lean on things like guardianship or trusts. A trust is its own legal operating entity. The trustee is the person named to carry out the intentions of the trust. So the executor is to the will as the trustee is to the trust. Think of the trust as purely a cardboard box. It's a container, something we put into, a titling mechanism. Now, there might be a few different types of trusts. They're revocable, irrevocable trusts, and first person and third person trusts. A revocable trust is obviously something that we can revoke, we can change, we can manipulate as we live. An irrevocable trust means that once the assets are in the trust, they cannot be touched, they cannot be adjusted. Take this a step further. First person trusts, the donor and the beneficiary are often the same person. And a third person trust, the money may come from someone else, not necessarily the same person. So, and oftentimes in our case, third person trust might come from a grandparent or the parents themselves, specifically for the care of the special needs individual. We also want to make sure that we talk about guardianship. The guardianship assumes the legal responsibility for the ward. People often take the term the ward of the state. Idea is that it's just the legal responsibility of that ward, that person. So how do we provide from a lifetime of care, quality of life, and a limited amount of assets? The answer often is, not always, often is the special needs trust. Remember, the trust is its own legal entity, which can have its own Social Security number. It can have its own identification number as well, not necessarily the same number. The trust can be irrevocable, so that the assets in the trust can never be used for any other reason other than as outlined in the supporting documents for the trust. And we want to make sure that we understand the difference between the beneficiary and the owner. The beneficiary is the person who the trust is created for their care, for the ward. The owner of the trust may be the parents, it might be the third party owner, whoever the funds are coming from. And then we have a trustee who's making sure that these directives of the trust are followed. Let's focus on the trust documents, right? The inner workings on it. We want to make sure these trust documents allow us to itemize specific uses of the assets in order to enhance that quality of life and provide that lifetime of care. But to do it in such a way as to be specific without being restrictive. Think of it this way. We want to make sure that assets are designated to go into it, but we might say if we're talking about real estate, that we might be funding it from a real estate purchase. We don't have to necessarily say the specific residence that is going to be funded. We also want to account for specific trigger points. These could be things that come into place in situations like divorce. Because guess what? People get divorced and we don't want the special needs and that lifetime of care affected of that individual or individuals. We have to pay attention to asset levels. Let's say that the assets within the trust are now going to be above a level of, in general, 250,000. Well, do we need fiduciary assistance? Fiduciary has become quite a trigger point in my financial world lately, because the idea is that we have to follow the directives of that to the letter of the law. And a fiduciary could be a third-party trustee, maybe an organization like WISPAC or a trust company that will step in and administer that trust so that we don't have an individual or an uncle or, taking care of it on that end. What happens if that child dies? How do we account for these assets now? Well, do we distribute them equally to the living first cousins? Do we distribute them to charity? These are things that we want to make sure that we are accounting for, because the laws governing these trusts are very state specific, and it's very important to work with someone who specializes in this, and it's made sure that they're accounted for. I know it's very high level conversation, but we wanted to make sure just these are some of those inner workings of it. So how do we fund it? How do we get assets into this so we can ensure that quality of life and lifetime of care? There are many types of assets they can go in. They all have their own benefits. They all have their own downsides. The most common thing, oftentimes, is we hear about real estate. Why? Because that's often the single largest piece, especially in situations like this, the single largest financial piece. But it can be very restrictive. Real estate is illiquid. What I mean by that is you can't necessarily just go to say, I'm going to sell my house tomorrow, and it's back in the market and we're receiving the funds in a week or so. It's the restrictive. We're also funding it with investments. Those could be parents' retirement funds, that could be trust documents, that could be stocks, bonds, savings, money market funds, you name it. We could be retirement funds, like I mentioned. Pensions have been used in the past to it. Probably the most common themes on that side that we use are ABLE accounts and life insurance. So I want to just talk briefly high level specifically about those two, because those are probably the most common on that space. Now, I would venture a guess, if you're remotely familiar with the community, we've all heard what the word ABLE account. What is an ABLE account? Achieving a better life experience. They mirror a 529 plan. So a 529 plan, specifically in general, is for higher education expenses. Very similar. There's some recent legislature, which in the last couple of years, that allows us to commingle some funds from 529 plans into ABLE accounts. So these are, in my world, very unique tools that we use quite extensively. But like anything in our world, they can be restrictive. So In today's dollars, and this probably will change next year and it'll probably change the year after, accounts can receive no more than $17,000 per year. That's our gifting limit into an ABLE account. Our state account limit is there cannot be a maximum of $330,000 in there. We cannot put more than $100,000 of principal, meaning me as an individual, I can't put more than $100,000 of gifting into it. Wisconsin does not have a specific ABLE plan, but the advantage to that, we can go to pretty much any state we choose and we can work with that plan. We have to be careful with that restrictive side that there is a medical payback provision. Not always common, but in theory, the state can say, well, you used $10,000 worth of Medicaid over the years. If once you pass away, we're going to claim those assets back. So we have to make sure we're taking that into account. Let's talk about the probably the second and honestly most effective means to transfer assets and how to fund it. Life insurance. Why life insurance? It's very simple and cut and dry, and there are certain tax provisions that make it very attractive. It's very simple in regard. It covers so the life experience of if I'm to pass away, my beneficiaries would go to, Max Mutual Life Insurance, Northwestern Mutual, provide the death certificate. Those benefits are paid out a lump sum, tax-free, and it can be relatively affordable. There are many different types of life insurance, one of which I think I wanted to chat about later in our conversation, but it's very efficient and it quite frankly, oftentimes it fits the bill, meaning it can be quite affordable to do it. We can by providing $1,000 a year of premium, which is what we pay in for it, we may see $100,000 death benefit or something. A little bit further onto that side, we often see something like survivorship life insurance. Now, if you're a little bit unsure of what that necessarily means, the only difference is you're insuring two different lives. So why we bring that up? Often people don't necessarily pass away at the same time. So we have a mother or father. We will basically equalizing that inheritance, making sure that, we can take care of those things and that it's the second to die. So this life insurance policy will only pass away when the second beneficiary does. How much life insurance do you need? Nobody knows. It's all different. Everything is based on everybody's unique situation. There could be things that we take into account, final expenses. What kind of funeral would we need? What are our cash needs? What are those long-term financial obligations? What are the living expenses of, in this case, the individual that we're trying to account for? Do they go to a quite expensive home, or there's some of the are they quite independent? Do we need to fund a lifestyle for a long time? And quite frankly, what's their current financial resource? So these are all obviously things that I say them only to be things that we can think about, not necessarily needs that have to be solved, but we need to think about them. Now that we've talked a fair amount of how to create it, some of the documentation in a trust, and how to fund it, let's talk about those legally, just kind of how do we instruct and educate our feelings and how we want these trusts expressed to our family members and who the people are actually going to administer the trust when it comes into place. We need to make sure we're communicating those to that next in line, the next caregiver. Communication is key. Like everything in life, we hear it in the workplace. We hear it in, my goodness, you can hear it from your therapist. You can hear it from this. I hear it from my daycare teacher picking up my 4-year-old today, that she needs to communicate better with her. The idea is we need to be drafting that letter, making sure that we're not jeopardizing, we're explaining those concepts effectively. How often do we do that? Well, very simple. In my case, and it's not necessarily an enforceable document, but we would just draft a letter, right? Can communicate so they don't accidentally jeopardize eligibility. Here's an example. Oftentimes we have Uncle Johnny who might be want to buy a savings bond for payable to Sam, the special needs individual. Well, maybe we have a letter that instructs Uncle Johnny, rather than him buying that savings bond or giving that cash to Sam directly, we have a letter that says, let's draft it, let's pay that specifically to the trust so that it doesn't jeopardize Sam's eligibility for Medicaid, etc. Very simple documentation. It's a standing letter. To be perfectly honest, a fair amount of my clients, I have that letter on file so that when the situation comes up, and guess what? We're coming up on Christmas. This is going to be an issue. Hey, I think Grandma Sally is going to give a little bit of a cash gift to all of the grandchildren. We know we've got this trust. Sam's on benefits. Here's the letter. Please give this to Grandma. We'll make sure that it's taken care of so we don't jeopardize his benefits.
Paul, just a quick
Yes.
question here. When you're talking about that, especially with holidays coming up, is that the same for able accounts as it is for special needs trusts? Like, could you say, please don't give them the money directly? You could deposit into the able account or in the special needs trust. Are there different rules?
100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. The idea is that what you're doing is the primary reason is just don't put it in their name, right? Like that's the biggest instruction possible. It could be a trust, it could be fund the able account. The able account can get more complicated than necessarily just the trust, but very viable option. So great question. Okay. The other thing I want to make sure we talk about, and this is the personal aspect of it. So the letter of intent, it's not a legal document, but is every bit as important as any legal document you'll ever use. Think of it as like I'm a bit of a auto mechanic and a car nut myself. So think about it, the owner's manual for your child. The letter of intent covers anything you want to include. So very specific things about what's the diagnosis of Sammy? What is Sammy's true diagnosis? Does he have specific medical and nutritional needs? Um, what are his dislikes? Are there marriage issues that we should know about? Is he religious? Does he like to go to church? Is there a certain pew he likes to sit in? I know it sounds silly, but that's the personal side of things that in our families, this stuff can make a huge difference. Um, is there a counselor that he likes to work with? And maybe that counselor, this letter of intent needs to be updated because that counselor retires. But this is kind of like that user manual, owner's manual of what are their likes, needs, their tastes, um, what's right for everybody. It's right for you specifically. What are important names and addresses? Hey, Uncle Jimmy lives down the road. Sammy loves to hang out with him. This is his address. This is where he lives. Here's his phone number. Very specific, like very just personal things. It's not a legal document, but I love to have it in there. It's incredibly important. The final piece I always want to just kind of chat about, and this is on a financial planning side of things, is long-term care. So years ago, we wouldn't necessarily, and actually I fought the original um, owner of the company. I pushed him quite a bit to include this slide purely because this wasn't necessarily an issue many years ago. But people are living longer and longer. Care is getting more and more expensive. Remember, let's back up. Need and affordability. Cost of living is going up, medical insurance going. How are we taking care of ourselves and making sure that we're planning for our children at the same time? A good example I like to use, when we're on the plane, a flight attendant tells you to put the mask on yourself before you put it on the child next to you. The idea being, make sure that you have a plan in place so that you don't jeopardize those assets that you have now designated for that special needs trust. Long-term care has become a big fit factor right now. What is long-term care? It's some sort of planning for costs that are going to come up that could be a nursing home, in-home care for yourself, things like that due to injury. Basically, like as I said, put the mask on yourself so that it doesn't jeopardize the child. And I shouldn't necessarily say child, I should say individual. How do I get started on this process? Because it's amazing how often Tim and I have this comment, and people say, well, it's funny, Tim, with you been in the transition talks, etc. People haven't started it. Oh, Tim, Sam's he's 24 years old. Am I too late? You're not too late. You just have to start somewhere. Okay. And I would say the biggest thing to that is just start going chatting to someone like Tim, myself. I love it. I live in the Milwaukee area, but I work statewide. Actually, at this point, I pretty much work countrywide. Work with some people who specialize in this. So I have my CHSNC. It's a chartered special needs consultant. I'd like to say there's only a few of us in the state. There's probably a smaller list of it that I think are viable, very well qualified people. I'm one of them. I know there's other good ones out there. Sometimes it's just a personality thing. Who do you like working with on that? But I would say you have to start somewhere, start that conversation. And we generally work with a network of financial professionals. So I'm not an attorney, but I know really good attorneys that work in this space. Um, I also know caregivers. I know people like Tim who work in this. It's often just surrounding yourself with a network of like-minded people. So backing up a little bit, if I could put the cherry on top of it, you are the expert. You know your families, you know your children, you know your situation more than anybody. Start with yourself. What we're trying to do is that lifetime of care, the quality of life, and how we're working within a world that these needs, we have to balance it with affordability. So start here. What do you want for your children? What do you need for your children? And where's the balance here? There's never a wrong answer. Here's my 2-second plug. This is one of my financial specialties. I relatively well connected in the community, and I have access to a trusted network of qualified subject matter experts. I'll say that, and then I'll also say I'm not the only one that does it. There's a lot of good, like-minded people out there. So start somewhere. Thank you so much. And Tim, I'm sure we have some questions, but
Let me get my views back here for gallery view so people can, if they want to come off their, if they want to be seen and ask a question, that's really cool. If not, that's okay. I will be able to see if you are unmuting. I do have everybody on my screen. You can also feel free to put any questions into the chat and I'll be sure to relay them to Paul. First of all, Paul, thank you very much. I know people have questions and I know they're also trying to sit there and go, okay, I don't want to get too personal.
sure.
If they did have a question they wanted to ask offline, like can they reach out to you just with a simple question? I mean, everybody's worried about costs. We know that people have studied and put in a lot of work to gain their knowledge. So we don't expect that knowledge to then be given for free, but how could people, if they do have a specific question that's like a little bit more to go into, and maybe they don't want it recorded even?
100%. So what I'll do is, and Tim, if you don't mind, if I'll let Tim share my information after here too, rather than you guys trying to scramble and write it down. Um, I am a working professional. We do, need to support our family. That said, it never hurts to ask. I don't charge any consultation fees whatsoever. If it's a quick question that needs to be answered or you don't, there's no such thing as a dumb question, right? I think in general, we've all got to start somewhere. I don't charge any fees and probably till like third or fourth meeting. I learned that, picked that up from Bob along the way too. This is one of our specialties. We love to do it. It really impacts our community. So if someone would like to reach out to me, and if I, to be honest, if I don't know the answer, I'll be the first one, and I think Tim knows this quite well. I'll be the first one to say, hey, that's not my thing, but you should go talk to Matt DeMark. You should go talk to Bob Johnson. You should go talk to this person. And they can give you a good answer. So um, more than happy to answer anything along if there's anything specific along the way. But if there's something in general, I'm sure there's always a couple good questions that pop up along the way. Um,
We do have a question from Mazen.
okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this talk. I have two questions. First one, it's a question for an attorney. We had an attorney last week or last time, but I forgot to ask that question. So I do have, and I did make an estate document, estate planning with a subset of a special needs. But
Okay.
I guess you just opened my mind to more questions like, what's the financial part. Do I so I live in the Green Bay area. Do you guys come up to the Green Bay area, or if we need to meet you, we need to come to Milwaukee?
I will be in the Fox Valley tomorrow meeting a client. So my primary business I own is Meridian Wealth and Retirement. We have an office in the Fox Valley area. So I'll be up there tomorrow. I'm probably up there a couple times a month. That said, Zoom is a wonder. I joked about technology earlier. It doesn't always do what we want it to, but I am very relatively technology savvy. I hold digital meetings all the time. So I do come up frequently. That said, I understand, we have to work with your schedule too. So if there's
Okay.
questions for me, and again, if there's
Yep.
other people out there, that I'm more than happy to
So
figure out.
I guess I'll ask my first question. In the guardianship world, if you don't mind, maybe you can answer this. Can three people be guardians with or between their names? So it'd be like myself or mom or brother. That's one question. Have you come across that question?
I have come across that question. I'll caveat it. This is just protecting myself. Again, I'm not an attorney. I have seen it. I will say it can get complicated. There's often, and Tim, maybe you can expound upon this a little bit more. There's often a primary decision maker for specific things. Okay. So think about it this way. If we talk about in able-bodied, if we have a power of attorney for healthcare needs, well, somebody has to make that decision. Right. Ultimately, it's going to come down to one person to do it. The more people are involved, the more complicated it can be. So we might see staging that say initially it's mom and dad make the decision. If mom and dad are not able, it may be the other son in that case. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I've seen.
So you can capture that what you just said in a guardianship application that says mom and dad are decisions if they're not available. Let's just say, for example, my wife and
Yes.
I are busy, and her brother, again, it's my daughter. Her brother is with her in the emergency room, and he needs to make a decision. We're not there. We just want to be able to give him the power to make a decision in case we're not there, not just because we're dead, or maybe just because we're somewhere else. We're not
Yes.
there at the time. We just want to make sure that he can also make that because he knows as much as we do what his sister needs are and can make. We want him to be able to make decisions for her.
And my understanding is yes, an attorney should be able to write in some documentation that should state that too. Like I said, it can be complicated, but I have seen things like that done. It doesn't necessarily have to be one decision maker.
Right. Okay. And then again, I'm sorry for being specific. So is there an age limit for someone to make a decision? Like our son is 20. Can he be legally be able to make a decision?
Yes, 18.
18. Okay.
So
Great.
he's good.
Yep. Yep.
All
And
right.
then yep.
We have one hand up. We also have two things in the chat that came in first. We're going to go to the chat and then I'll get to the raised hands. So the first question is, we have term life insurance that we got when our kids were born. And lately we've been getting offers from the company to convert them to annuities. I'm worried that our term life insurance could expire before we die. What type of insurance do you use to fund a trust?
Any and all. But term life insurance is a specific type of product, right? It will run out in a specific time.
Mhm.
I'm going to hazard a guess they might be talking about a conversion to permanent life insurance, which is a whole life or universal life or something like that. There might be some benefits there. It could be cost prohibitive to do that. So I don't know anything about your financial situation, but that's something you want to explore with another financial professional. I certainly would love to have that conversation to take that deeper, but that's something that we want to make sure, hey, maybe the best thing we could do, take another term life insurance policy out because it's cheap and affordable. Maybe we do want to convert that. Maybe we dump that insurance entirely and we rewrite it with another whole life insurance policy or a universal life policy. Or I mentioned um, a second to die policy. That was pretty common. They're relatively common in this space. So, to answer your question, yes, you can do that. It may not, but you might want to explore that conversation a little bit deeper. And I'm more than happy to do that, obviously with you, not knowing anything about your situation. But um, if they're specifically saying move the term to an annuity, be careful. I'll say that and leave it at that.
Sounds like a deeper conversation, and you don't want to get yourself in
Yeah,
trouble.
I don't want to talk too
Right.
specifics into it, but
Right.
careful.
Okay, second in the chat, and then we'll go to Wendy. How restrictive are ABLE accounts? Do the funds have to be used for disability-related expenses? Does that include a laptop for virtual appointments or a gym membership for exercise or to pay for some social activities through the local disability groups? And is it hard to get money out of the fund?
All of the above. They're not necessarily restrictive. They're very lenient in what the funds can be used for. They're more like a petty cash account than you can pretty much use it for anything. So if in our case, little Sammy needed a new laptop, Able account's probably one of the best places to go for that.
But it
Um,
has to be used for that, the owner of the ABLE account. So you can't like
exactly.
take the money out of the ABLE account and say, well, Sammy wanted to give me a gift.
Yes.
Oh,
So let me clarify. It's specifically for the benefit of the beneficiary, right, Tim? Not the owner, beneficiary of them. Right? So
thank you.
yep. Um, so it's like the petty cash account for that specific individual. So you can, they're not restricted from that part. They are state specific, like I said. Some are necessarily might be a little harder to get access to, but they're all pretty straightforward. You don't have to justify what you're taking it out for. That's between you and the state agency. So there's no restriction of you. It's up to you to justify what it was taken out for. I shouldn't say for you, it's up to the seat and if they're looking into it, but
And I'm assuming most these days are just electronic fund transfers.
100%.
Okay.
If not a check in the
Wendy,
mail, so pretty quick.
yeah. Wendy, go ahead and ask your question.
Um, it's not a question, but we have a young man that my partner is guardian for, and when he originally had a guardian of person and a guardian of finance, and then when she took over full guardianship, I was made the standby guardian. You can't have two guardians at the same time, from my understanding, but you can have a standby situation set up so if something happens to the primary guardian, you're all set to go. The paperwork's already done. However, you can do a power of attorney to allow somebody to do any and all things that would be done in his stead or in their stead by the guardian. And that
Right.
power of attorney could give the other members of the family the ability to take him to the doctor's office and things like that.
Correct. And make some of those decisions for him, right? And that's kind of what I was
Right.
trying to, without getting too deep into the weeds on the legal side, it is possible as to the specifics. That's something an attorney would have to illustrate out for you.
Mm-hmm. So I just say that because I have another young man for whom his entire relationship here, that's how we've had to deal with it because of issues with the parents and things like that. So powers of attorney can be powerful things.
Incredibly powerful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah,
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Coming from the chat. Can SSI funds such as an SSI payback amount be used to fund an ABLE account? Talk about the funds of the person you're setting up the ABLE account for. So going into that person's ABLE account, it's their SSI funds. Would that be, if you got a payback, can that go into ABLE?
I've seen it done. Yes.
Okay.
I'll leave it at that.
Sounds good. Any other questions?
Now, okay, let me caveat that.
Okay.
I wouldn't say you can't deposit your Social Security, SSI directly into an ABLE account. There has to be a conduit that this transaction is taking place in, right? So it has to get funded to another place. Then we will see a transaction and often a check coming over to. So we just have to be a little careful. But I've seen it done. Yes.
I have a question for Paul.
Please, Ms. N.
Yeah, so Paul, so again, going back, so we do have a special needs a trust set up for our daughter. I guess going back to what you were saying, like how much like, so I have a 401k, I have investment plans, we have a house. So how much do you know, like how can you fund, like how do we know how much to use or how much to use to take care of her without, as I said, jeopardizing her benefits, government benefits?
Yeah. So the goal, it's more complicated than on the face value you think. So in your case, Mazan, what you're trying to do is, I think you mentioned your wife. So we need to retire you. Okay. So the goal in our case is to make sure that we retire you, because chances are you're both going to retire just fine. But we need to make sure that should you predecease her, she's taken care of, right, for the remainder of her life. And that's where the planning comes into place of using different vehicles to accomplish different things. So 401ks, etc., they can use big funding trusts and things like that, but maybe they're not necessarily the best vehicle for an immediate need. Right. So we need to make sure that we're always multi-layering these investment products and insurance products to do different things. So I'm purely not only a life insurance salesman, but it's often the most convenient vehicle to do it because of the tax benefits on that side, so that I can focus as another goal is to retire you and your wife someday. Right. And then also account for the state that you mentioned you had a son earlier. Well, fair is not always equal, but we want to make sure that, hey, if there's inheritance, maybe he gets something too, right? How do we account for that? And are they getting equal portions of it? Do you want it to be 50-50? Often not, but we need to make sure we're accounting for that.
So I mean, we
conversation.
figure, yeah, I think it's a deeper conversation. So I guess my question, so we have created again the trust,
Yep.
and where it is not 50-50, so we've designated. So is that enough to go forward? Let's say it's 70-30, or do we
I don't know.
we need more,
Yeah, I don't know enough
we need
about your
more.
situation to account
Yeah.
for that.
So I guess my question is, does that need for me to sit with a professional like yourself to go into deeper conversations? Is that what we need to do next, my wife and
I would, yes, that would be my
Okay.
natural next step for you. If I'm not doing a good enough commercial for myself, is to meet with someone like myself who can go through that planning process with you. So we don't, again, on my end, we don't charge anything to initially meet, to have a good chat about it. And then when it's time, we can talk specifically about like the financial planning process and what the fees, etc., would look like at that point. But that's what I would do.
Okay, and again, you said you have an office in the Fox Valley, so that would be close to
We
Green
do.
Bay.
Yep.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Any final questions before we sign off for the evening? Okay, well, as you're formulating them, I want to thank Paul again for being here. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of this unseasonably beautiful late October day. Not sure what's going on out there, but thank you for spending time with us. We do have a number of Transition Talks Tuesdays still to come. So if you haven't registered, you still have time. If you have registered for them, cool. I'll be sending out the email reminders. Thank you all so very much. And Paul, thanks again. Have a great day. I am going to stop the recording.
Thank you so much.